Thank you. Good morning. I'm Aaron Reed from Sentinent Decision Science. I was having a conversation with a colleague of mine a couple of weeks ago, and he asked me what I was going to present at MRMW. And I said I was really excited about the presentation. I said the first thing that I was going to do is talk about how important it is that while we take one step forward with our new mobile access to consumers and our data collection methods, it's really important that we don't simultaneously take two steps back with the research methods that we're using on those mobile devices, that we need to include non-conscious measurement in our mobile market research. And then I said, after that, I'm going to transition into how neural networks form and how implicit associations essentially quantify System 1 processing and measure the degree to which people associate automatically emotions and attributes with brands and products and packaging. And then after that, I'm going to go into some case studies. I'm going to show how adding non-conscious measures to your current conscious measures always increases the predictive accuracy of your models and provides you with deeper insight into why people do what they do. And then I'm going to finish that talk with how all of this technology is currently available on mobile devices and it's globally scaled. And I was really excited about that, and I was waiting for his reply, and he looked at me and he said, "Aaron, do you ever get sick of saying the same thing over and over and over again?" And he didn't mean that pejoratively. It was an honest question. And it struck me, it made me think of a couple of things. First, it just reminded me how woefully slow we are in market research at adopting new techniques and new insights from the behavioral sciences. It reminded me of a paper that I read back in graduate school in 1999. You can stop doing the math, I'm 42 years old. It was called Visceral Factors Theory, and it was published by George Lowenstein. And in this paper, he described emotion as it overrides reasoning in extreme behavioral circumstances like falling asleep at the wheel or drug addiction. And I thought that was really compelling, this idea that emotion could override or overweight your reason processes. And we took that insight and we started to publish papers on how emotion mathematically served to overweight reason in decision making. And this was back in the 2000s. We quantified emotion and called it emotion as a tradable quantity. And then we started to publish these papers about human irrationalities and how you could actually systematically predict what people would do if you incorporated quantitative measures of emotion into your choice models. And this was really fascinating. But we weren't the first to actually start to question whether humans were irrational. In fact, we were actually late to the game. If you remember Ben Leeds' presentation yesterday, he talked about Kahneman's book, Thinking Fast and Slow, which was published in 2011. Kahneman's first paper was published in 1972, debunking rational economic theory. That theory that all choice-based conjoint that we use in market research is based on, the linear additive utility model, started to be debunked back in the early 70s. That was 40 years ago. And of course, Kahneman wasn't first. Herbert Simon predated him in 1955 with his satisficing theory. And you're all familiar with the Stroop effect? Maybe not. I'll show you what it is in a second. The Stroop effect was published in 1935. And the Stroop effect is actually the foundation for all implicit association techniques that you see in practice today in market research. Let me show you what the Stroop effect is. We can all do this together. It's a very simple task. You have to name the color the word is printed in as fast as you can, starting with column number 1. So let's all do it together. We'll say it out loud. Name the color that the word is printed in, starting with column 1. Ready? Blue, brown, white, red, orange, purple, pink, green, black, gray. Simple, right? Now let's do column number 2. The task is the same. Name the color that the word is printed in. Ready? Brown, white, purple. Yeah. It's a little harder. This is the Stroop effect. There's cognitive dissonance there. Your mind is reading the word, green, but it's printed in brown, and your task is to say brown, but your mind has just read green. So there's cognitive dissonance. It takes you longer to make that judgment, and you make more errors. That basic principle of an incongruence between a prime and an objective judgment is the foundation for all implicit research. This is from 1935. It's 2015 today. Woefully slow in adopting these insights. The second thing that my colleague's comment made me think of was this. This is some data from the GRIT report in 2015. This is the percent of the market research industry that's currently using neuromarketing techniques. And if you think of that from a product adoption curve, you're all familiar with the chasm. We're in an early adopter phase. Once we cross about 16% of all users, we get into the early majority phase. So we haven't crossed that chasm from early adoption to early majority for the application of neuromarketing techniques. And you can read about how I feel about that term neuromarketing on our blog separately. So it struck me, what does it really take for us to make the argument very effectively that it's urgent that we get these methods incorporated on a broad scale into market research techniques? And we think that there are three keys. First, we have to make sure that the science is sound. You're going to see that there are actually a lot of pseudo-scientific techniques measuring implicit associations in the marketplace. That doesn't have any legs. We have to make sure the science is sound in order for this to have a long-lasting impact on market research. The second thing is we need to increase the awareness of applications. Most people, when they think of neuromarketing, they think ad testing. And it's actually very good for ad testing. But the number of applications is really it's quite large. It's a vast array of applications for implicit association techniques. And then third, we need to continue to publish market validation. We need to show, by predicting sales or providing deeper understanding of consumer behavior, how these methods are actually valid and useful for market research. And so his comment is actually really useful for me in constructing the presentation, restructuring the presentation. We're essentially going to try to do this, talk about the sound science. We'll then show you some applications for implicit research. And then finally, we're going to finish with some market validation case studies. So let me begin with the science. Has everyone heard of the can't say, won't say issue in market research? This is essentially the problem that consumers often can't or won't tell us the true drivers of their behavior. The won't say problem is something we've known about for a long time. That is, consumers, shoppers often won't tell you what they really feel because they're afraid of social embarrassment. But as researchers, we figured out creative ways of getting around that, right? We have good ways of asking questions. We use projective techniques. But perhaps more pernicious is the can't say problem. This is the problem that consumers often don't have conscious access to the true drivers of their behavior. And this is a significant issue for us because consumers, even if they don't have conscious access, will give you a conscious answer. If you ask consumers a question about why they did what they did, they will tell you, whether they know why they did what they did or not. So what we need are research techniques that allow us to get around this can't say, won't say problem by measuring what's happening automatically in consumers' minds, essentially quantifying system one without relying on any explicit questions. In order for that science to be sound, we have to debunk the notion that response latency equals implicit. This is the pseudoscience that I was talking about a little bit earlier. Simply measuring the response that it takes somebody to answer a conscious question does not isolate non-conscious processing. It goes through a conscious filter and therefore is still subject to the can't say, won't say issue. True implicit techniques must not be direct, deliberate, controllable self-assessments. Let me show you the difference between these two. Imagine you're in a study on your mobile phone and we're going to ask you to tell us how you feel about certain brands. If you like them, swipe toward yourself. If you don't like these brands, swipe away from yourself. And we're going to record the response time, your response time, how long it takes you to make those judgments. So it would go something like this. Like toward me, don't like, swipe away. I swipe towards myself, I record the response time. That is a measure of my non-conscious association with that brand. I don't like that brand, I swipe away. I do like that brand, I swipe towards myself. This is a basic response latency technique. It's being positioned as an implicit technique. It's not. It's a controllable, deliberate assessment of the brand. It passes through a conscious filter. Let me contrast that to a true implicit technique. In this task, I'm going to prime you with a brand. That prime is going to influence your ability to make a subsequent judgment. I'm going to record the response time it takes you to make that subsequent objective judgment. Just like the Stroop task, if there's cognitive dissonance, it will take you longer. If the prime is consistent with the judgment I have you make, it will facilitate your judgment and you'll be able to do it more quickly. Here's how that goes. Prime, is that emotion positive? Yes. Prime, is that emotion negative? Prime, how you automatically feel about that brand influences your ability to make the judgment that follows the presentation of that brand. Seems like a subtle difference. This technique isolates system one. It quantifies what's happening automatically in consumers' minds. The response latency technique may, but doesn't necessarily. Have to get the science right. Number two, applications. When you think of neuromarketing techniques, you typically think of ad testing. But in terms of applications, you can actually use these techniques across the entire brand communications loop. And you can use it for customer experience. You can use it for brand positioning, for advertising testing, for package testing, for brand extension research, for concept product pricing research, for customer experience, in-the-moment research, for brand tracking. We'll start with advertising testing, then we'll hit a few of these, and we're going to end with a political ad test. When we're doing validation, it's really critical that we have the right dependent variable. We don't want to use non-conscious measures and then try to validate them with conscious measures. What we want is some behavior of interest in the marketplace that we're trying to predict as our dependent variable. So in each of these cases, you're going to see we're using actual data in the market, either sales data or online sharing behaviors, as the behavior that we're trying to predict. The second thing in validation is you want to make sure that it's actually providing you with some novel insight, something that you wouldn't necessarily get with conscious measures. So we'll show you a couple of examples of how that works as well. The first one, ad testing. This is ad testing from the last Super Bowl. There were 61 ads in our test, a little over 3,000 respondents on 50 different brands. We tested them all. I'll give you an example of one here. This one is kind of amusing.
I don't know you, big buffet boy 85. But if you think you can humiliate me and take my gold, think again. Oh, I'm coming for you with lots of barbarians and dragons. I can't wait to destroy your village while you beg for mercy. But you will get no mercy. I will have my revenge.
Liam? I have a scone for Liam?
Over here. It's, Liam. You will regret the day you crossed Angry Neeson 52.
Angry Neeson 52.
Nice brand moment there at the end, Clash of the Clans. We love that. In implicit ad testing, what you want to measure is not the implicit reaction to the ad. You want to understand the effect of the ad in changing the implicit associations with the brand. And so following exposure to the ad, we measure the automatic associations with Clash of Clans. We compare that to a control group who weren't exposed to the ad, and we look at the lift or the change in the automatic associations that you have with Clash of Clans. We did that across all of the brands tested in the Super Bowl. And the dependent variable that we wanted to predict was online behavior. So iSpot TV does a wonderful job of quantifying this digital share of voice, what they call a digital share of voice, and it includes things like the number of online plays of the ad, number of social actions essentially around the ad. So we're capturing real behavior in the marketplace related to each of those ads. We're going to predict that across all of the ads tested by looking at the change in implicit associations with the brand following exposure. Here's the correlation. The first thing we want to do is take a well-known ad evaluation metric like the USA Today ad meter and see what the correlation of those measures, basically a 7-point Likert scale, how well do you like the ad, and see its correlation with this behavior. That's a correlation, and it's about 0.35 correlation between USA Today ad meter and the online behavior related to each ad. We then take that same data and we see how does the non-conscious data do in predicting online behavior. Significant improvement. The correlation is a 0.63. You'll see numbers go even higher when we start to look at sales data. This data right here tells us there's something missing. The conscious data that USA Today is capturing in the ad meter is not capturing the entire picture. It's part of the picture. It's not the entire picture. Adding the non-conscious measures to the predictive model significantly improves the correlation between response to the ad and actual behavior in the market. How about brand tracking research? The very first study we ever ran with implicit associations back in 2007 was a brand tracking study. It was so important that we had representative technology back then because we didn't want to systematically eliminate anyone from our sample. This was a brand tracker. We had to be representative. In 2007, mobile wasn't that important. A few years later, mobile became imperative. If you didn't have implicit association technology on mobile devices, you were missing a significant portion of the market and you couldn't use it for things like brand tracking. That's all changed in recent years. How many people have done a brand tracking study where you ask a battery of questions like this? Please rate the following brands on these 23 attributes. Agree or disagree? Diet Coke is social. Diet Coke is refreshing. Diet Pepsi is cool. How many people have done a study like that? Yeah, it's hard to admit it when I'm hitting it so hard, right? We've done them as well. Well, in this study, we compared the two side by side. We did explicit judgments, these rating scales of associations of these attributes with these brands, and we looked at the differences between these two brands. And what we found was the explicit rating scales said that there was only one significant difference on 23 attributes between Diet Coke and Diet Pepsi. And the brand managers looked at this and they said, we know that's not true. We know that consumers think about these brands differently. So we measured the same attributes implicitly without asking what people thought, but measuring what they automatically felt towards those brands. And we looked for significant differences between the two brands. The implicit method revealed that there were actually 13 significant differences at a non-conscious level between these two brands. This is about getting deeper insight, true insight into how people really feel about your brand. The conscious technique simply didn't have the power to reveal what was happening in consumers' minds. The implicit technique provided a wealth of new insight that the brand managers could use to differentiate these brands in their communications. This can also be done in customer experience or in shopper studies. Here's an example that we partnered with Research Now on. Sorry, Ben, we do work with Instantly as well. They have an online panel, and in this particular study, we measured implicit associations pre-store, in-store, and then after the shop. This was a really fascinating study. We sent people on a mission. We asked them to shop the snack aisle, and then we had them take pictures of products that they both considered as well as products that they purchased. We had them take pictures with their mobile phones. And then the technology actually uses a product matching algorithm. This is great for all of you who are capturing in-store imagery. Uses a product matching algorithm to match the actual photo with products that we have in the database. So essentially, respondents are doing the coding for you. Then that product is pulled into an implicit study and used as a prime. Instead of a brand, we're actually using a package as a prime. Now you've got primes for products that people actually purchased versus those that they considered but didn't purchase. And we can evaluate the automatic associations that consumers have with those products. You can do that in-store, or you can pipe it back into a study that they do but when they get back home during consumption. Here's an example of what kind of insight that research provides. In this case, we saw those products that they purchased resulted in higher feelings of excitement, pride, and relief, and significantly lower anxiety versus those products that they considered but didn't purchase. That's providing you with a motivational, emotional profile for this category. What are the motivational emotions for this category measured implicitly? It's excitement and pride and the absence of anxiety and relief. That gives you really good insight for innovation, but certainly messaging, both pre-store and in-aisle. How can you evoke excitement and pride while mitigating anxiety? All done without asking any explicit questions at all. How about price pack size optimization? This is an example of the application of implicit techniques that's used to optimize the price and the pack size for oatmeal within Walmart. In this study, we measured multiple hot cereal brands, and we coupled implicit association techniques with choice-based conjoint. I was thrilled to see what Skim Group was doing on mobile conjoint yesterday. It was really wonderful innovation. I love that research on research. This is in the same vein where we're using conjoint as a foundation for conscious measurement, and then we're adding implicit associations on top of that to incorporate the non-conscious component. We measured people's implicit associations and their reason-based judgments relative to oatmeal in the fourth quarter of the year, and then we got actual sales data from the client for the first quarter of the subsequent year. So this is forward-looking or leading indicators. We then correlated the conscious measures with actual sales in Walmart. And this is actually the R-square value, so the correlation is about 0.6. The conscious measures, or the conjoint, accounted for 41% of actual sales in market. That was actually pretty good. When we look at just the implicit measures, we see that the implicit measures accounted for 51% of the variance in actual sales. That correlation is about a 0.7, if I do the math right. Somebody can take the square root of that for me. But here's the key. When you combine the two, you're actually accounting for 80% of the variance in in-market sales. And this is a really important message. It's not that you just want to measure the non-conscious. And you'll hear that from a lot of people who provide these services. That's really false. You want both the conscious and the non-conscious, because that's how the mind works. You need a system 1 and a system 2 measure. And when you combine those two together, universally we see that that model is more accurate in predicting behavior. That's the R-square value of 80%. The correlation is actually 0.9. How about fashion? When we looked at this in fashion, the results were even more compelling. In this case, we were predicting new product launch. A client was coming out with new products for the market, and they wanted to understand what was going to be most successful. We made the predictions before the product went into market, and then we got the sales data afterward. We also got the buy, which is essentially how much they spent on each item to stock in the stores. The buy accounted for only 28% of the actual sales data. What that means is that they were overstocking a lot of items. They didn't have a very good sense of how to optimize their stock inventory. If you looked at the conscious model, it actually accounted for 69% of the variance in in-market sales. The correlation is a 0.83. That's very good, and in the least that says, hey, do a conjoint study. That's going to give you really good data. But again, the punchline is when you combine the two, when you include conscious and non-conscious measures together, the R-square value is 94. We accounted for 94% of in-market sales before those sales occurred with a combined model. The correlation is a 0.965. Does this work in something as mundane as like folding tables? Absolutely. In this case, we were trying to understand which features were most important for the client, which features are most important to consumers, and which should you emphasize in your messaging. You'll get a sense of what the flow of these presentations looks like when you see this data, the conscious model, 56% of actual in-market sales. The combined model, 91% of actual in-market sales. Combining conscious and non-conscious data in all of our case studies improves the accuracy of your choice predictions. I wanted to finish with hope. I loved the talk yesterday on political polling, and obviously there's a lot of things that have to be improved there. Ipsos mentioned that it's early stage in incorporating implicit associations in political polling. We did this back in 2008, and it was early stage back then as well. This was for the election between Obama and McCain. We presented this at a research conference actually on election day in the morning. And so I said to the audience, if what I show here today doesn't actually turn out to be true, you can disregard everything that I said, which was a little bit risky, but fortunately it turned out well. The explicit polls, we picked two swing states, Pennsylvania and North Carolina, and we also did a national poll. In the two swing states, the explicit polls showed that Obama was going to win both states pretty comfortably, more so in Pennsylvania than in North Carolina. So it was pretty accurate in Pennsylvania. The actual results showed 44 and 54 in Pennsylvania, but what happened in North Carolina was really intriguing. It was razor thin, 49.5 to 49.9. And so the explicit polls didn't quite have that kind of sensitivity, and this was a surprise. We ran it explicitly, but we also ran it implicitly. When we looked at the implicit data, what explained that narrow margin win was how independents were acting in North Carolina. In North Carolina, independents, when you asked them explicitly, how favorable do you feel towards these candidates, they told us that they favored Obama significantly. But when we measured how they really felt implicitly, there was a slight advantage for McCain. So what they said didn't match with how they felt, and it didn't reflect with what they did in the ballot booth. But the implicit association data did pick up that nuance. And this is an example of how implicit association, or the non-conscious, can potentially account for, in political polling, what we call the Bradley effect. What people say in the polls may not necessarily be what they do behind the curtain in the ballot booth. I want to finish there and say, check us out at sentientprime.com. This technology has been made available to any researcher in the world who wants to incorporate non-conscious measurement into their research practices. And here's an example of where is sentientprime.com, where in the world we're currently measuring the non-conscious. If you come to our booth, you'll see that active live map. Every time somebody taps into our software to get their non-conscious measured, we have a little ping on our map. It's a little creepy. About 30% of all non-conscious data is currently collected on mobile devices. That varies study to study, but that's about the average. Thank you.